You wouldn't know it from my video game channel, but I actually love One Piece. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've spent more time on One Piece than any other franchise in my life. I've seen 541 episodes of the anime, the first 384 of those I've seen twice. I've watched all 14 movies. I've watched several, but not all of the various specials, whether they be full-length features like Episode of Nami, or random sorts like Django's Dance Carnival. Speaking of that video game channel, I spent a good amount of time playing the series too. Not even counting crossover fighters like Battle Stadium Dawn, Jump Ultimate Stars, J-Stars Victory vs. Plus, or Jump Force, I've spent countless hours on One Piece games, mainly through the Pirate Warriors series. I've managed to platinum both Pirate Warriors 2 and 4. I would have platinumed the first if RNG wasn't funky bull shrimp, and I'm still working on platinum Pirate Warriors 3 every now and again. Beyond those, I've also platinumed Burn and Blood, meaning the one true One Piece waifu, Koala. One of the grand battles, I don't remember which one, but I think it was 2. Romance Dawn for the 3DS, Unlimited World Red, all games I've also put time into. I've even bought the VR game, though I'm petrified of all things reality, so I'm not sure why I bothered. And of course, I've read every single chapter of One Piece, all 1,000 plus. And that recent 1,000 chapter milestone is exactly why I'm here this week. I want to celebrate one of the greatest series of all time. I've got 5 new videos all on One Piece to share. By the end of this week, my channel will be 1/4 One Piece. And remember, if you want to see all those videos, thank you! And if you don't, well hey, you have something in common with the majority. Enough self-promotion though. Today I'm here to answer the question of how One Piece justifies its length. I will be keeping this as spoiler light as possible, by the way. So for those who have always been turned off by One Piece's length, this video will hopefully convince you at least that the length is in part of why it's so highly regarded. That said, by the nature of video editing, the visuals featured here will further hint to reveals or showcase prominent moments that might be best experienced seen for the first time with proper context, so if you're still worried about spoilers, it's probably better to just listen to this video than watch it. But enough dilly-dallying now, time to explain what makes One Piece so special. And there's several reasons, however, I think the main reason can be summarized simply as growth. While it's certainly not the norm, there are still plenty of series that seemingly last forever, and most of those series don't really change all that much from beginning to end. The status quo is a comfort for many, and a lot of the longest running series embrace that element. The Simpsons is now in 700 episodes, and Homer still hasn't been arrested for child abuse. As somebody who loves Cowboy Bebop and Hunter x Hunter, it's a come as no surprise that internal variety is probably my favorite feature of a series. So this stagnancy in many long runners is a turnoff. Like in Bob's Burgers, the reason I stopped watching that show is because I read an interview where the staff claimed they'll never age up the characters. I still found this so funny, but I'm not interested in spending a lifetime with characters that will never grow or change. And it's not just Western animation that faces this problem. 2 of the longest running anime franchises features this same issue, Detective Conan and Lupin III. I'm not going to pretend like I'm all caught up on either of these. Hell, to me, Detective Conan is still case closed, and I'm aware that it does eventually have a plot, but it takes so long to get to, and it's been on long enough for Jimmy to have naturally grown back up to his proper age twice over. I love the series, but I just have little drive to continue forward since the series has little to no momentum. As for Lupin III, well, I'm only on part 2, and the fact that all the main cast has been in every episode has significantly hurt the show in my opinion. Zenigata especially. In part 1, the characters only showed up when they were needed. Now it just feels like Zenigata is shoehorned into every episode whether he makes sense to be there or not. What used to be a versatile series that used its characters expertly has turned into feeling like a rigid formula to the detriment of the characters. Don't get me wrong, it still has some great episodes, but the superfluous status quo of the series has kept me from watching it more consistently. But those series are by design more episodic affairs, which One Piece decidedly isn't. Is One Piece's sense of advancement really all that special when you compare it to its ilk, the other long-running shonens? Bleep yeah it is! Let's compare it to the only franchise I may have wasted more of my life on, Dragon Ball. I think Dragon Ball has a great sense of progression and change up until the end of the Frieza saga. Just look at the tournament arcs. The first arc is filled primarily with comedy bouts ending with one serious battle. The second arc is more of a 50-50 split, some funny fights, some dramatic encounters. The third tournament arc has one funny battle while the rest are serious. The gradual shift of the series' tone is expertly handled, and the Sand and Namek sagas provide a great sense of continuation and escalation. However, after Frieza, I'd argue Dragon Ball doesn't really grow anymore outside of power levels. Had they continued with Gohan as the main character, it would've, but they default back to Goku pretty quickly. This is especially evident in Super, where it's mostly just Goku and Vegeta getting caught up in a battle scenario with stronger opponents / circumstances. Like, yeah, the Tournament of Power arc introduced a bunch of new characters from different universes, but that didn't amount to anything other than a bunch of new characters to battle against. Goku and Vegeta gain new techniques and abilities, but again, that's basically just getting stronger. So it's technically growth, but it's not meaningful growth. I get that Super is handicapped by the fact that it takes place before the ending of Z, but the status quo nature of the Goku and Vegeta show does hurt it. And Dragon Ball's not really an anomaly here. I find very few Shonen series truly capture a great sense of growth all throughout. I mentioned Hunter x Hunter earlier, and while Hunter x Hunter has much more internal variety to it than One Piece, I don't think it has a better sense of growth. This is also true of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Both JoJo's and Hunter x Hunter change so radically between arcs and parts, it doesn't always feel connected. Chimera Ant is very loosely connected to anything previously. The only real ties to the narrative prior are that magical beast was shown to exist in the Hunter exam, and Kite. And Kite only counts in the manga version because even Madhouse makes mistakes. Chimera Ant is my favorite story ever told, so I'm by no means bad-mouthing it. I'm just saying instead of feeling like a natural evolution of what came before it comes across as a brand new idea built from the ground up. Chimera Ant does tie back into earlier arcs in clever ways, like how it uses Nen or character arcs, but narratively it feels less like growth and more like a change. Stuff like Naruto does fare better. There's definitely growth for Naruto and Sasuke, but it doesn't nearly accomplish what One Piece does. For one, it feels a bit reductive, like Free Time Skip spent a good time developing characters like Rock Lee and Neji, that both being demoted to background characters in Shippuden made it feel regressive. I just feel like even if the scope increased and the Akatsuki plot advanced, the focus of the series itself feels like it narrowed. And maybe that's not entirely fair, though Final War arc does give Gaara some good stuff for example, but I also feel Set arc drags on too long, and I don't think most Naruto fans would disagree that Kaguya's introduction wasn't well established and sort of felt out of nowhere in comparison to how well Madara's build-up was handled. Like I said, Naruto clearly grew, but for the more narrow focus, both when it comes to characters and plot, it just doesn't compare to the sense of evolution that One Piece features. And One Piece is what this video is all about. I know, I almost forgot too, that would have been embarrassing. Seriously, I know I spent a lot of time speaking all things not One Piece, but in order to understand how truly special One Piece is, I needed to cover the norm. Whether growth simply comes down to power levels, whether it's just laser focused on a character or a single plot thread, or if it's less about natural narrative expansion and more about variety, I can't think of a single series that captures the tremendous sense of evolution that has propelled One Piece for 1,000 chapters. One Piece is Monkey D. Luffy's story. There was no arguing that point, but unlike Naruto, which is even more obviously Naruto's story, One Piece constantly expands its narrative focus. Luffy remains a major component regardless of what's going on, but Oden manages to keep Luffy a central figure while constantly expanding the players involved. Because in order to be king of the pirates, you have to have a pirate crew. The introduction of each crew member is one of the most exciting things about One Piece, and provides truly meaningful growth in the series. This is best exemplified in Fight Together, the best OP in the series. During the bridge where the song is at its most emotional point, the visuals go through the most important moments Luffy shared with his crewmates up to that point in the series. You can always spot a sociopath if they don't get teary-eyed on that part of the video. Even ignoring the context Fight Together displays these in, it's so effective because it's an acknowledgement of how much personal history we and Luffy have with each of the Straw Hat Pirates, of the emotional moments we've seen them endure and get past, and how Luffy was the anchor for them. Every new crew member adds new crew dynamics, a new fighting style, new jokes, new emotional backstory, a new dream, and a stronger connection for the audience on this journey. This is why Naruto felt reductive to me, because again, Rock Lee gets this fantastic personal arc from the Chunin exams till right before the time skip, that his role in the series being reduced to just guy's student and literally nothing else really did hurt the series for me. It felt like we were backpedaling on a character that I grew such a strong connection to. In One Piece though, every Straw Hat member is basically a Rock Lee that remained vital. Obviously not every Straw Hat member are equally vital, at least in terms of screen time, and there are various points in the series where select crew members disappear altogether, but they always have a strong narrative explanation, and Oda has yet to let any member of the crew feel worthless during an arc they're featured in as an active component. Maybe worthless is a bad choice, but if a crew member is in an arc, they almost certainly have a role to play in that arc. And with each individual carrying their own respective dreams, that's more goalposts to look forward to achieving. That's more of the world expanding. And when it comes to world building, I mean, is there any series that can top One Piece? Its best competition in my opinion is Shinsekai Yori. That show had like 2.5 episodes that were just info dumping about the world's history, and I swear, those were some of the most captivating episodes I've ever seen. But besides that, One Piece feels untouchable here. One Piece started off as a simple story about a rubber boy trapped in a DK barrel, but now it's this massive series filled with multiple pirate forces vying to reach the One Piece, the world government filled with honorable marines and shady officials, and one of the most interesting undiscovered histories I've seen. The Void Century is the most compelling part of the One Piece narrative in my opinion. The way information has been trickled in, the most recent reveals about the top of the world government, the ancient weapons, the absolute scumbags of the Celestial Dragons, and of course, the revolutionary army that opposes the world government. There's so much more to One Piece's narrative than simply Luffy's desire to be king of the pirates, and while it sounds like an overwhelming amount of information, it's handled very delicately by Oda. A lot of this information comes in between arcs, so while you'll be focused on something with a more linear goal such as beat the jerk, as a nice palate cleanser, you'll be greeted with all these interesting tidbits for what's going on outside the Straw Hat Pirates in the world. That's not to say important information is never delivered during the arcs. In fact, Wano's intermission system has been a brilliant change up to the formula. But I'm just saying Oda's made taking in the information more manageable by usually not having more pressing matters going on. A lot of times, this information is allowed to take the center stage. And of course, the world being interesting means nothing if it isn't populated with multiple interesting characters. There are so many characters in One Piece. There are several that obviously exist for like one arc or whatever, and mostly appear whenever Oda decides it's time to do a cover story on where everyone is, but beyond them, there are still a ton of active players in the One Piece world. It is so fascinating to get these little snippets of what everyone else is up to, especially knowing that within One Piece, these aren't pointless diversions. Many will end up having some form of narrative weight to them. We've seen that play out. Oftentimes, these are more exciting than whatever the Straw Hats will be dealing with, and going back to growth, I remember when the only outside information we had about One Piece was that Shanks was a pirate somewhere with Usopp's dad, or the misadventures of a little buggy. And these cover stories I keep referencing are just another way Oda manages to expand the world in meaningful ways, as once again, many of these have narrative weight to them. A great example would be Hachi's cover story. Cover stories are legitimately one of the most genius things I've ever seen in a manga. I'm surprised I can't think of another series that attempted something similar. However, this unmatchable sense of growth that's dominated the discussion isn't the only thing that's worth detailing when talking about how Oda uses One Piece's epic length to its advantage. It's also worth talking about how frequently plot points are hinted at, only to be revealed hundreds of chapters later. There's a level of cohesion to everything in One Piece, a level of interconnectivity plastered throughout the series that lavishes in the history of One Piece. My favorite instance comes in Thriller Bark, but I daren't say anything else on that one. It deserves to be experienced firsthand. However, one I don't mind talking about is Haki. It's basically One Piece's equivalent to Key, except with more structured applications. It's a secondary battle system following Devil Fruits. I wouldn't classify this as a big spoiler on its own, especially since I won't be discussing what it can actually do, but Haki isn't formally introduced in the series until about halfway through, I want to say. Despite that, there were hints towards it as far back as Chapter 1. Now, I don't actually believe Haki was planned as far back as Chapter 1. I think Oda just knows how to expertly incorporate the history of the series to flesh out new concepts, because regardless of when he conceived Haki or how I even feel about it, it feels like such a natural extension of the world since we saw the roots before it ever bloomed. There's plenty of instances like this. Some of Sanji's gags or throwaway lines managed to get incorporated or foreshadowed into bigger storylines. So not only does its length allow for one of the greatest sense of growth you'll experience along a journey, but Oda cleverly plants or uses seeds for future events, making it a gratifyingly cohesive story. However, this cohesion doesn't just end at plot points, it also extends thematically and tonally. Now for the former, I can see this being a problem for some. A lot of arcs do follow the same basic premise of overthrowing a tyrant ruler of sorts. Kingdoms need saving from their oppressive or destructive regimes is something that's littered all throughout One Piece, and I can understand some people finding that bit of the plot a bit too repetitive. But it creates a more thematically consistent profile for One Piece, and it can be rather interesting analyzing the repeated themes between many of the arcs in One Piece. For example, many of the arcs post-timeskip can serve as analogs to previous arcs in the series. Dressrosa and Alabasta, Whole Cake Island and CP9, and Wano's got some Thriller Bark callbacks and Marineford vibes to it. As for tonally, the series can get quite dark, especially when slavery gets involved, but I think the most impressive thing is that One Piece never truly loses its sense of childlike wonderment about it. Obviously, this series has gotten more serious and the stakes more dramatic as the series progresses forward, as per the growth discussion, but Oda never loses the sense of fun. Arguably, this does cause a clash. I remember some people complaining that Enies Lobby's battles were too comedic for how grave the situation was, and that's a position I totally understand. But I also think it's an admirable quality that One Piece has avoided ever becoming, for lack of a better word, emo, despite tackling heavy topics while treating them seriously. But at the end of the day, the most important reason One Piece's length is to its advantage is simply this. The Koan arc in the manga, Wano, is considered by many to be the best arc of One Piece. Personally, it's not my favorite, that would be Water 7 or Skypiea, but Wano is definitely up there. It's rare enough for a series to be a long runner and remain quality for its entire run, but it's astronomically rare for one to be reaching its peak so late in its run. It actually seems likely that the final arc of One Piece will be able to deliver on the hype, that One Piece could conclude at its strongest, which is insane to think about. There are of course ebbs and flows in the manga. I don't think every arc improves upon the last, or that there are no bad arcs in One Piece, but there's so much great arcs in One Piece, and Wano is legitimately one of Oda's best. Pending the ending, but I have complete faith that Oda will nail the resolution. One Piece is special because it takes you on a true journey with growth unlike any other, uses its rich history to deliver a cohesive story, and is still producing some of the best arcs in the medium's history. One Piece's length is anything but a negative. Except for Dressrosa. That arc didn't need over 100 chapters.